right, what's good, everybody? Welcome to Diversity and Inclusion in the Latin Classroom as part of Cambridge's series on diversity and inclusion. I am John Bracey, aka Magister Bracey, and I'm here to talk to you about that. And I'm joined with the woman, the myth, the legend, all of the above, the pride and joy currently of Texas, but originating from Louisiana. Is that right?
Yeah, good memory.
That's right. Originating from Louisiana, the incredible and talented Jenn Jarnigan. Right.
Hey, everybody.
Hey. So the topic of this series, and this is part one of the series, is assessment. And part one of the series is about when to assess from a diversity and inclusion perspective. So when to assess. So let's flip it over to you, Jenn Jarnigan.
All right.
When?
All right.
When?
Well, ideally, I like to assess when I feel like 80 to 90% of my kids would likely get an 80 or 90% or better. All right. What I mean by that is the types of responses I'm getting to my questions in class, the way that students are using the language, the way that their body language is telling me that they're buying in, they are feeling comfortable, they're excited to be using the language. There's no fear or anxiety or anything that could read to me as fear or anxiety. When I put up pictures, they're excited to tell me like, oh, I see this, this is what's going on. That's especially true of my fifth graders, where the approach I use when doing fifth grade Latin is a very animated, very speaking heavy kind of approach. That for me, I find I have a lot of flexibility in those lower grades. Our fifth and sixth grade program is sort of an exploratory program. And so you really have a lot of freedom to be very flexible in your assessment, right? As kids get older in seventh and eighth grade, though, I kind of don't always have that same freedom and flexibility, in part because students have semester exams that they have to take that are worth a certain percentage of their grades, in part because as students developmentally, as it becomes more appropriate to shift your grade book to have a larger percentage of their grade being based on tests and quizzes and these sorts of things, I want to make sure I'm giving enough of those types of assessments, right? Because if you have your grade book set up to where tests or major projects are worth 50% of a kid's grade and you're only giving one a quarter, that test is worth a whole lot of that kid's grade. So when we talk about the sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion piece, for me, there's really two things that means. One is trying your best to gauge when kids are ready to be successful and try to give them opportunities at that time. But the other is making sure you're offering enough assessment opportunities that there's no one grade in your grade book that's going to really make or break, that a student can't come back from. So that's always kind of the balancing act, I feel like, is making sure they have a lot of opportunities to show you what they can do, lots of opportunities to learn and grow, but also you want to be responsive to what you're seeing in the class, responsive to, if your kids come in and they tell you they're all so worried about this big research paper, or this big math test, or whatever it might be, I would probably move a test in the grade book back a little bit so that a Latin test isn't butting up against something that they're stressed about, because I'm not going to get their best work. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. And I know, John, we were talking a little bit before we started recording that I'm teaching kind of the younger age range. You've got a little bit of the older age range now up in high school, but how does this kind of look for you, especially as you get into things like upper levels and AP and things like that?
Oh, well, it looks very similar. Like I have a pretty similar philosophy on this for how to make this work for everybody. And I think where there's the biggest overlap, I think, is in this concept of assessing when you know that all of the students in your class are going to do well, that's probably the biggest principle that I think plays in universally. And that goes into the idea of like, what's the purpose of assessment to begin with, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point of it? So, I mean, just for the process of learning another language, I mean, all that really matters is that you're constantly hearing the language or you're constantly reading the language and it's language that you understand. And the developmental process is going to look different for absolutely everybody, right? So, there's there's nothing in my opinion to be gained from just evaluating and ranking students for the sake of it, right?
Yeah.
So for me, is the point of it is to stack successes, as I like to call it.
I like that.
So when I know that everyone's going to succeed, that's when I give the assessment, because I know that everyone's going to do well on it and they're going to come out feeling accomplished. So the opposite of that would be assessing because you want to catch them not knowing something. And that
Yeah.
becomes compare and compete and kind of punish and reward behaviorism, which tends to benefit the people who always benefit. And that's not really our goal here. Our goal is for everyone to be successful. So I determined that the same way that I would in every level. I taught middle school for 8 years, same thing. Now that I teach all levels of high school, all the way up to the highest level offered for Latin students, that doesn't change. I still offer assessments when I think students are going to do the best on it. Now, there's things that I do to ensure that they're all going to do great on it. Like, and we can get into that in another video. But for today, the question on the table is when to assess. And the answer to that question, I think we're both saying, I think pretty emphatically, is when you can assure that those kids are going to be successful. Otherwise, why do it? What do you get out of it? If you don't think they're all going to do well, I mean, what are you trying to find out? If you're like, well,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure this person's going to do very well in this assessment, and these people aren't. Well, then why are you giving the assessment? If you already know, what's the point? So wait until you think that everyone's is going to be successful, and that's when you give the assessment, regardless of level, And it's okay if everybody does great.
And I think it's also important when you think about when everyone does well, what does that mean, right? Like, is it everyone gets a 100? That's not what I'm going for. I think of everyone doing well as everyone hitting proficiency benchmarks. If there's a certain place that I know I need to get my kids to from the start of the year to the end of the year, when
Mhm.
I feel like they've hit a benchmark, they can demonstrate they've hit a benchmark, right? Because at the end of the day, we can never truly know what's in someone else's head.
No.
The only thing we can know is what they're able to show us, right? Um, and so once they're starting to demonstrate those behaviors in class, when you're doing casual asking them questions, or if you use homework, when the answers start to be more confident, be more consistently accurate, those are good indicators that kids are ready, in my opinion. And I also consider, again, doing well. We're going to have some kids who, an 85, that's great. They're feeling good. You're going to have other kids who, for one reason or another, the story they tell themselves is anything below an A is bad. And I think we kind of owe it to kids to combat that and try to push back against that, because it's not the most healthy relationship between your progress and grades. If you put too much emphasis on the grade for yourself, it's you're kind of limiting the type of experience you can have in a class. I say, as someone who was very, very worried about grades and was very worried that teachers wouldn't like me if I didn't make good grades, which as a teacher, I know that's not true at all. You like the kids who are cool and who are funny and who are kind and who are interesting. And if they happen to make great grades, awesome. If not, you're going to help them make better grades. That's not how it works, you know? So I try to communicate that to students and make sure they know that I don't see them as their grade. Um, but just knowing that kids have a sense of anxiety, and some of your kids really need to know, no, when is the quiz? Like for real, I need to know when the quiz is. How do you kind of balance that? Have you found a good way to kind of help the kids who want the date on the calendar feel a little bit better? Well, I can tell you what my strategy is, but I'd love to hear yours too, because I'm curious if they're similar or not.
Oh, so in this regard, when it comes to like the timing of the assessments themselves, so I don't give announced assessments. I haven't in a long time, and I want to make this super clear that I'm not doing this from the look how difficult I am, or I'm bragging about how brutal I can be. It's literally the exact opposite. I do not give announced assessments at all for all of those reasons. And the first one, and we'll get into how we get there, in a different video, but the first one is the one that's slightly scary, but that one is always like, this is a practice run, this is a trial run. We're going to do one totally unannounced. And if it's scary, you'll let me know. If it's not, you'll let me know. And the way that I do it, it's never scary for anyone. And then after that, the process like ends up being way less stressful, because everything that we do is based on what's happening in class and what I'm observing and what they can do. And when I find something that I think that absolutely everybody can do, that's what I assess. And that gives me the flexibility to do it then and there, that moment. And then whatever happens outside of class doesn't come into the equation. So there's no like, I don't have to worry about, one student has a revolving door of tutors who come by, every day to work on whatever with them. And then one student has to cook dinner, work a late shift and all these other things, or like lives for like, it's none of that stuff factors in. It's what I can observe in the classroom. And when I see it, boom, now I'm going to hit record on the success.
I
So
love that.
that's how I do it. What about you?
That's awesome. I very similar, particularly in my fifth grade where I have that level of flexibility. I refer to them as snapshots. Like
Mhm.
it's not a quiz, it's a snapshot. It's just what you look like right in this minute. How's it looking? And just like if you snapped a picture of me, I might be mid blink. And then I would say, hey, can you take that picture again? I'd like to take a better one. And, if you think about it as in terms of taking a picture, no one's going to be like, no, that's the only picture I'm ever going to take of you. Don't
Yeah.
blink. But yet that's kind of the way we think about quizzes sometimes. Like, well, you should have studied that first time. Mm-mm-mm. So I do retakes. I've got a policy in place for quiz retakes. I try to do pop quizzes. The most important thing though, if you want to go the unannounced quiz route, kind of like John was saying, I just want to make it super clear. Quizzes are not a punishment. Assessment is not a punishment. If you link that for kids, all you're doing is making them more stressful, more scary, and you're setting yourself up as kind of the villain of the piece who's like, now I've got him, Um, sometimes, I mean, I teach middle school, like nothing could surprise me anymore with a kid doing, saying, thinking, feeling, whatever. Like I won't say I've seen it all because no one has ever truly seen it all, but I've seen a lot. And, you know, I can be a bit of a disciplinarian. I have firm boundaries and there are consequences, but a kid's grade never should factor into the behavior consequences or those other types of discussions and things like that. So you don't want to link, y'all are all being terrible today. So now this assignment is for a grade, hand it in.
Yes.
That kind of thing. You're all being horrible, or you were all horrible for the sub yesterday. So I'm grading, you're having a test today on da 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 da. And I understand that that's tempting sometimes, especially You know, if that's, especially if you had a sub because something bad happened in your personal life, or you had a sick kid or what have you, and you're stressed, and then you find out that kids made really bad choices, and that sucks. Like that's a stressful feeling for you. But it's going to be so much more impactful if you kind of explain to the kids, and in as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and remaining professional, but saying like, I had to have a sub because my kid got sick in the middle of the night, and it really hurt to know, on top of being worried about his safety, not being able to get good sleep with for him or for me, worrying about my sub plans, trying to make all of that and putting in some effort so that you could still have an educational experience, that you chose not to show that sub the great people you can be. And the way that they think of you now is people who don't really make good choices and who aren't really very kind. And that really hurts, that I don't get to show off to other people in this community how great you can be. And I'm just really disappointed. Like, saying that kind of thing to a kid 99% of the time is gonna like, like, and that might not feel like a consequence, the way giving them a quiz right then, or a pop quiz, or a, I'm gonna grade your homework, or whatever the case may be. But try to remember back when you were 11, 12, 13, sitting down with an adult saying, I'm very disappointed in you. What were you thinking? Walk me through what was going in your head. That is a consequence. Like, that's not fun. That's not fun. And if it becomes, I'm gonna need you to write a letter and apologize to that sub and take ownership for what you did. Or I'm gonna need you to explain to your adults at home what was going through your mind, and we're gonna, like, there are other ways. In other words, there are just other ways you can make that consequence that shouldn't be tied to your grade. I kind of went on a little bit too long, but that's kind of the idea. um I don't necessarily feel like I could get away with all pop all the time in my upper level classes, and like upper middle and into high school classes at our school. We use the learning management system Schoology, which is pretty
Okay.
user friendly, works well, has a nice calendar function. Um, so what I do is, whenever we start a unit, I using backwards design of, this is what I want kids to be able to do at the end of the unit.
Okay.
So this is how long I think it's going to take me to get there. And then I put that test on the calendar 2 to 3 weeks out, depending on how long the unit is. And then, you know, I have never personally had kids be upset if you have to move the test back a day or 2 days. You know, if you set it for a Thursday, but then as you're working towards that deadline, you can tell they're just not quite getting it as well as you want. Or, here in Texas a couple years ago, we had a really bad tornado that went through North Texas, and we lost about a week of school. Well, obviously, everything in your grade book's going to have to be pushed back because A, you missed actual time in the classroom, but B, some kids lost their houses, or they got really scared because the storm was really bad, or they had a lot of other things on their plate. And there's nothing wrong with saying, we have other things to deal with right now. We're going to push back when this is due. Like, there's nothing wrong with being open and flexible and moving things back if you think it's in the best interest of your students, for those kinds of things. So I think that's kind of, for me, how I balance it. If you've got strong backwards design planning, and especially if you have a prep you've done for a while, having a sense of the rhythm that students get into, but always making space for, every year is different, every group of kids is different, we all have lives that are going to impact, you know doesn't matter what you did Tuesday, if something happens on Wednesday, that should impact what you choose to do on Thursday. You know what I mean? Like, so you've got to have a certain amount of sensitivity to life and the way that it can change your plans. um, and that's especially true if you're in a system where people are very big on preparing kids for the real world, and there are deadlines and all these things, and there are deadlines, and that's true. And having a scheduled assignment, a test, quiz, project, whatever it might be, in the grade book is part of it. But I have never been in a situation where, if something really, really stressful, really bad happened, I couldn't talk to someone and get a deadline extended if I needed to, right? there are reasons you can delay paying your taxes if you go through the right hurdles and do the right things, So I don't, there aren't too many situations in which that deadline really can't be moved, period, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I think the big takeaway is that it's okay to be flexible. It's okay to adjust your assessments based on whatever is happening. It's okay to change when they are. It's okay to grade, and if they're not great, to chuck them out and try again. The key thing to making it work for everybody is, again, flexibility and assessing so that you can prove what your students are able to do, rather than choosing to assess as a punishment or as a way to, set some students apart from others. These are all the things that send us into this divergent track of the haves and the have-nots, and that gets us going the exact opposite way from where we want to go. We want our assessments to occur when they're most beneficial for everybody. And that's, I think, where we're going to leave it for today. Tune in once again, and we're going to go deeper into the topic of assessment, and we're going to get into concrete details of how to assess, what sort of assessments to give, and how to make them in a way that's going to ensure that every type of student you have is going to be successful. Any parting thoughts, Jen, before we take off?
No, I think you summed it up wonderfully. Just, being flexible, being open with students, being honest, letting them know what your rationale is for why you're assessing when you're assessing, just keeping that communication open. And that really is sort of a magic bullet for a lot of things with building community and building confidence for these kids.
Boom. I love it. Couldn't have said it better. Well, we're signing off. Come back again and we'll get into greater detail. All right, y'all take care.